Welcome to the SkillTorch Disrupt podcast, where we dive into the world of innovation and technology. My name is Melica, and I'm the founder of SkillTorch, which is a digital and tech recruitment company that operates across the globe. Today, I have with me is Christian Kletz, who is the CEO of UserGems. He's here to join us to talk to us a bit more about what's happening in the world of hiring. And recruitment and the changes in churn and people leaving and going into one job to another. Christian, I think you're not. I mean, obviously, I own a recruitment company, but I think you can kind of dive in and be the expert in this realm and give us some interesting insights about what you've uncovered here. But yeah, if you can just introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hey Melica, great to be here. Yeah, I'm CEO and co-founder of UserGems. So UserGems, it's actually interesting, like the how we get from kind of like recruiting to the company where I'm working at. So we are a sales and marketing solutions company. The idea is that we help you prevent churn and generate pipeline by tracking people for job changes. So I think you're seeing it a lot from the recruiting side. We had a whole phase of layoffs. Now I think already getting a little bit better and people getting rehired. But it's
Yeah.
interesting that these events also have an influence from the business side of like other companies, because ultimately these people that get hired and maybe laid off or changing their job are actually the ones that are using and buying my tools.
Interesting. So tell us a bit more about your background before you started this. What actually made you start up this sort of company? Because again, I love the concept.
Yes. How much time do you have? But originally, I'm from Austria. Came to the US to do my MBA, and then started briefly worked at Google, and then started my own company. And the company, it was actually a recruiting startup at one point. So the idea was always there's so much information about people publicly available on the internet. So you can figure out who are the people that might be the right candidate for me. In our case, it was a recruiting startup that actually where companies could share profiles of people like, hey, I interviewed this person. They weren't the right fit for my role, but they could be interesting for your role.
Mhm.
And so we had a technology that identified the public information about a person, their role, the seniority. And then at some point, we realized, hey, this information could also be really interesting for sales and marketing, because even if I'm selling, I'm really interested about the professional information of someone. And then there were a few hops in between, and it took us a few years to arrive at something, but that ended up being really interesting, getting the information of actually your buyers, your users, to figure out who they are, and then ultimately to figure out when these people change their job.
Right. Okay. Really interesting, mate, your journey there. So, um, yeah, just kind of talking a bit more about what we're seeing in the market now. So, yes, you're right. In the past sort of year or nearly a year, we've seen a very interesting time in our market. I would say probably in the last 3 years. So, just to kind of give you an insight into what I've
Yes.
seen on my side when COVID hit. um, on that day where the lockdowns were announced, recruitment contracts were withdrawn, jobs were withdrawn. A lot of recruitment companies didn't have much going on. Then we got to about summer to sort of Q3, Q4, so around September time. And companies started hiring again, and a lot of the hiring that was being made was actually particularly on the engineering side, because as you know, more people were on their mobile phones, on their computers. So there was a need to build out infrastructure for some of these platforms. Now, a lot of companies had already laid off a lot of their HR and recruiting teams. So where did they come? They came to us. So I would say that I also had one of my best years, around 2020 and 2021. Now, what we've seen now is a huge shift in hiring again. We've seen a huge amount of layoffs across the FANG companies. Now, I feel like employees are actually looking to join, startups and really value those all over again. But I would say we've definitely seen a slowdown on recruitment, to be honest with you. So it'd be good to get insight about what you're seeing around those changes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were always looking at what's the percentage of people that change their job each year.
Yeah.
And on our end, what we saw basically, even going back further, is that the job change rate increased every year. Basically, people are staying shorter and shorter at their job.
Yeah.
And so we were always looking at about 20%, basically on average, 4 to 5 years, people staying at their job. And so the idea was if like 20, 25% of your buyers, your users change their job every year, then that's a really interesting signal for me
Yeah.
to act on. And I think what we've seen over the last year is that there might be a gap between when they leave a job versus when they start the new job. And so on our end, it was always basically the premise of our company has always been someone bought your product. If they move to a new organization, there's actually two events happening or two things that should be interesting for you. It's where they're leaving from, because ultimately a champion or buyer leaving means that there's a churn risk, and then where they're going to, because that's actually a sales opportunity. And what we've seen in the last year is this much bigger focus on the event of someone leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Because what has become this really big focus for all businesses is like growth is important, but not as important anymore. It's all about churn prevention. How can I make sure that this customer stays with me? And we found that a buyer or champion leaving has a 65% risk of them, this company churning. So now a lot of companies actually have a process of figuring out, if my buyer leaves, what should I be doing next?
Mm-hmm. And what are the examples of what they should be doing based on the, what you're offering and then what the data you've been collecting?
Yeah. And that's not only like related to our technology. Like we can let you know when someone leaves,
Yeah.
but ultimately there's a few things you need to do, and that's both process and product. So process means that like, the worst thing you can do is like, reach out before the renewal, figure out this person left, and then frantically trying to find a new one. But rather already right from the beginning, you need to figure out maybe there was this one person buying the product. Who else in the organization should know about me? So this means, let's assume someone buys my product. I want their manager to know about what I'm doing. I don't necessarily meet them in every meeting, but maybe I figure out who else in the organization should know, and then I invite them to the QBRs.
Yeah.
Or what we've done is ultimately every product that you purchase as a company provides value to the organization. So how can you quantify that value best? And then how can you communicate that value best? So what we are doing is we're sending every week, we're sending a summary email of here's what happened in the last week with UserGems. Here's what happened overall. And we're not only sending this to the person we're working with closest, but we're also sending this to their manager. And we've heard over and over again, like the worst thing that can happen is that like this manager that ultimately has the budget doesn't hear about UserGems, and then suddenly there should be the renewal, and I haven't heard anything about it. So that's the process piece where I need to make sure that I'm constantly communicating the value of my product. The other piece is then product. It's actually, is there something I can do to provide value to more people? So ultimately, product is a decision of, do I provide more value to the person I'm working with, or do I provide value to more people? And specifically in an environment where a lot of people are changing their job, it's really interesting to think about how can I bring more people into my product. So actually one piece of this should already start from the product direction and the product conversation.
Right. Got it. Okay. So products and process are like the key things here. So yeah, when talking about the gaps then, so when you see the gaps in between, going back to the changing jobs aspect, what do you think is happening in those gaps right now?
Do you mean right now when like the gap of I don't even know about this person leaving? Like I'm hearing about
Exactly.
them.
Yeah.
I'm hearing about the first time once. Yeah. Um, I I think it's just we are in this like the worst thing that can happen here is, let's assume like if my buyer like they as it was more than a year ago, they're looking for a new role, they get a new job, they put in their 2 week notice, or like 2 week in the US. Um, this at least gives them the chance to reach out to you, telling you that they are leaving and someone else is taking over the project.
Yeah.
But what happens now is oftentimes we have these, let's say, 20% layoffs, and the way they're done, at least in the US, is that from one moment to the next, this person is not with the company anymore,
Mm,
which also means that you are not hearing about them leaving, which
no.
means that you're totally in the dark about this for the next weeks or months.
Yeah.
And that's where this big gap is, because oftentimes like you only see it once you have this like renewal event or the renewal email, and then it's far too late.
Yeah.
I'm always, I don't know if it's like in Europe as well, but in the US there's Hamilton and there's this be in the room where it happens. And I'm always telling him like you need to be, even if like, you're not part of your buyer's company, right? But the
Mm,
question is, can you be in the room where the renewal decision is being made, or similarly where the purchasing decision is being made?
mm,
And the way you can be in there is by creating more and more champions. So your goal needs to be, it should be a metric that you track of how
yeah.
many champions do you have within an organization. And for every company where that number is one, I would put them immediately at risk, because the second this person is gone, you're at zero and then you have a problem. And right now, we're seeing this across the board that these events just happen too often to leave it up to this risk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then just talking about like, the aspect of renewal and the product, um, since the pandemic, again, we are starting to do face to face again. I mean, I'm a big advocate on face to face, but I also feel that, even doing some of this remotely and trying to schedule meetings with emails is not as effective as actually having that face to face exposure, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think like specifically in the US right now, we have like in San Francisco there is Dreamforce, there's SaaStr. So for sales and marketing companies, it's the event of the year. And obviously you want to be there to sell, but it's actually a really good idea to schedule these meetings in person, because this factor of talking to someone in person just increases the likelihood that you build a relationship that you need in these scenarios.
Absolutely. I feel like it's way more effective. It saves time. You get the deal done. But that's the thing. I think a lot of us have become quite too complacent and what does it call it? Zoom fatigue, we call it, don't we?
Yes. I think it's also actually really difficult in figuring out, like if you want to visit someone in the office, who's actually in the office and
That's
who
it.
isn't, and where is a person. Like even if you say, hey, come by and visit the office, oftentimes the answer is actually nobody's in there, or we're
Yeah.
in there like 2 days a week. Like it would be hard to visit UserGems because we're a fully remote company. So it actually is more about going to the conferences or organizing. We're doing more and more of these dinners at like in different cities to meet up with customers, to meet up with prospects, because it's much harder now to just like knock on a door and visit the office.
I agree. And again, like every industry event I've been to this year, it's probably been the busiest because I think people are trying to
Hmm.
make the most of like scheduling these face-to-face meetings, and that seems to be like one of the only places you can do it. Except with like doing coffee meets one-on-one, which, if you get one of those meetings, great, or even just I think were you guys doing the dinners across various cities is a great idea as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly like, a lot of work getting them organized, because you also once again need to figure out where are people actually, but certainly totally worth the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So in terms of talking about growth then, so what do you anticipate on seeing in terms of like what are how are you sort of analyzing what companies are thinking in terms of growth like during this climate right now, and how are you analyzing this and how maybe you and your team are sort of like helping advising companies on that?
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that the main question here is, when have we reached the bottom of the economy and when it is going to increase again? And I
That's it.
think specifically in the market we're in, I would say sales and marketing is always a little bit the first industry where it hopefully picks up, because ultimately, if we see signs of, for example, IPOs happening, then these companies are now ramping up. Like I think we've seen the phase that we had where it was about saving cash, like how efficient can I be? But you can only do this for so long, because at some point you need to show that you're actually growing at a certain
Yeah.
rate. And so what we've seen, the way I would describe the market is like that we're seeing early signs of growth restarting again.
That's
And
so
the main reason for this is yeah, it's because like the last 18 months, companies have been really looking at their finances, really looking at their spend. We've seen very few SaaS IPOs, especially over the last 12 years. So we've now the first one, the first really good one, Klaviyo, that's gearing up, and it will open the IPO window for 2024. And this will hopefully have an impact on the whole industry because these companies, A, are showing that it's possible. B, there's so many waiting for 2024, and they're now starting to accelerate. So as these companies are accelerating, they are now starting to spend again. And if they spend more on tools, it has a really good effect on everyone in the industry. So I think I've always been cautiously optimistic, but I think I haven't seen as many good signs in the industry as I've seen in the last month.
right. That's really interesting. And what about VC funding as well? Like, because as you know, we've seen quite a lot of it dry up, beginning of this year and last year. What about now?
Yeah, yeah. That's also one of the reasons why I'm optimistic
Mhm.
because the VC funding will also follow the good IPOs. So I
Right.
think we have a bunch of really good companies that are just waiting to IPO. And once we have, let's say, a Klaviyo IPO and we see them getting good multiples from the public market, ultimately the VC funding is based on the multiples that they're seeing in the public market. So
Mhm.
good companies going out there getting good multiples means that VCs are now like willing to invest again because they're seeing they can get the multiples they need to make their business model work. So I think my cautious optimism is really based on these companies gearing up for IPO for two reasons, because it means that they are now investing and spending and buying tools again, as well as that the VC funding ultimately follows that, which also gives companies like more money, which means that they are going to invest again.
Exactly. That's very true. Is there any specific industries and sectors that you're, seeing some trends right now?
I think there's we certainly have seen negative trends in certain industries, like in the SaaS industry
Yeah.
over the last 12, 18 months. So we've seen that even just if you look at investments, like companies buying tools, if you look at the really large companies and who they are selling to, then you see that in the software industry, their customer numbers stagnated or like stayed flat versus in other industries it actually like still was growing. Like we've seen even the big companies like Info, we've seen them having now more sales in like financial industry or medical industry. And so this is the first trend we're seeing, and we haven't seen another trend yet where SaaS recovers, but the hope is that they do over the next 12 months.
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, again, with they're saying even things like inflation starting to cool off now, interest rates. I mean, no one's. What was I listening to the other day? I think it was the Feds that were talking about the interest rates. It was a good conference. I mean, it was very mixed signals. Didn't really give a firm answer as to what's going to happen with the interest rates in the States, but very, very mixed signals
Yeah,
about what's
yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah, I actually wonder if like the recruiting industry probably is also always like an indicator for how it's going. Like
Yeah.
looking at, let's assume, how many job postings are open? What is the development of job posting within SaaS companies to actually identify at what point are they more willing to invest? So I'd be very curious if you have any information there.
Yeah, really interesting. So at the start of this year, I think recruitment took a big hit. I'm not saying that has happened with everyone, but based on me speaking to a lot of recruitment companies, that's the trend that we've seen. Mainly being is, a lot of people were laid off, and companies have also put roles on hold. So which is obviously affecting,
Yeah,
recruitment revenue numbers. There's no need for our services. Now, that being said, recruitment always goes in waves. This is not unusual. I think the only difference with this time is that, the economics, that there's been high inflation. Um, so I would say, like August, for example, August tends to be quiet anyway, just because,
mm,
especially in Europe, when you lived here, yeah, especially in
yeah,
France, Spain, a lot of people take a month off for vacation.
oh,
So
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons. And then you've got the school holidays as well. Now, I've definitely seen a lot of pickup. Like I'm definitely very busy now. I've spoken with people, and there's more jobs coming through now, vacancies that are being worked on. There's definitely more appetite for our services now. But I wouldn't say like we're in the same levels as the boom in 2021. That boom was a boom for all recruitment companies. That was unusual. Now I would say
Yeah,
it's leveling out right now, but I am very optimistic about Q4 and Q1. Like some of the conversations I've had in conferences or even just conversations in general, it's been about Q4 and Q1 onwards. And
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
seeing more candidates getting jobs now. I'm not seeing as many people be laid off now. So, I think, we
yeah,
will start seeing a bit more of an uptick. And we're seeing it at the moment, but
yeah,
I
yeah,
said it's going to take time.
yeah. Yeah, no, I would actually like it would be like if you look at, let's say, the top 2000 SaaS companies, I'd love to see what the number of open roles they had, let's say 2021, which was probably a ridiculous amount. But I would actually love to see how this developed and whether there's already because it's the only public number really that you have of these companies. So it would be really interesting to see that number because my gut feeling says that this number increased over the last 12 months, but
Yeah.
like it bottomed out and now we're seeing a small uptick. And I think if you're saying that the companies you talk to are planning for like Q4, Q1, I think that will be very similar to what we are seeing from the sales and marketing side.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly. And also, when I'm having some of these conversations with companies around their hiring plans, it's a lot more strategic than it was in 2021. 2021 is like, let's hire a load of people, and then you know what happens? There was layoffs. I think now companies are being a lot more selective and they do want to take their time. And, I mean, with a lot of startups, cultural fit is very important, but especially now it's absolutely integral for any person that joins the company is cultural fit. Now,
Hmm.
another difficulty we're seeing on the candidate side is I think a lot of us have been quite complacent, have been very used to remote work. Now, a lot of companies are trying to bring in the hybrid arrangements and on site now, and it's actually very difficult to sort of build that bridge between candidates and between companies around what should a hybrid model look like and how should we create like a remote
Yeah,
first or a hybrid first culture. And I think that's what companies are trying to establish.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's all like on our end, we're fully remote. We have people in, I think, pretty much all countries in Europe and pretty much all states in the US. So it's actually like, I think it would be really hard for us to go back. So I think there's really I think it's easy if you start out now, but, or
Okay.
maybe if you already had a huge hub model. But I think for us, we're fully committed to doing remote.
And then how do you all sort of like get together then? Do you schedule things like once a year to sort of like have like a, team thing or?
Yeah, so we have the engineering team in Europe and we
Mhm.
have the revenue team, so sales, marketing, customer success in the US. And the idea is that we have in a department, so the sales team meets once a year, then we have the bigger departments, like the whole revenue team meets once a year in the US and one in Europe. And then we have one big one where the whole company comes together.
Nice. Yeah, and that's the kind of trends I'm seeing with remote first. Like I still work with companies that are remote first, and it's really about having smaller meetings like once every quarter where they're doing team building activities, and then once a year the whole company gets together in one country and has dinner and drinks and awards
Mhm,
ceremonies and that sort of thing.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's once again, it's actually compared to, let's say, if you need to pay rent in San Francisco, um, getting everyone together is actually not that high of a cost in comparison, but it's super, super valuable to make sure because it does make a difference in whether you do it via Zoom or meet in person.
Definitely. No, it makes a huge difference. Like I think you just get so much from that like one team meeting. Everyone gets to know each other, it's very motivational. Yeah. So
100%.
tell us a bit more about UserGems. So just going into your product now, because you work with quite a few companies that I recognize as well. So it's a really interesting concept actually. Tell us a bit more about that and like what you offer.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting about the space we're in, and I mean this applies to a whole lot of spaces, but
Yeah.
certainly like we're basically sales and marketing space, which is it's ginormous, but it's also really crowded. There are a whole lot of providers in there. What sticks out about what we do is it's kind of like a Trojan horse for us. So it's easy to explain, easy to provide value. We do it better than anyone else. So it actually allows us to get into a space that's really crowded. So the whole idea is that if you track your buyers for job changes and you sell to them again, it's actually a much easier job. Like it's the easiest one for your sales reps to do this. But what's really interesting is that it scales with your size. So
Right.
pretty much every other revenue channel, like let's assume you do advertising on Google or LinkedIn, at some point you can't increase that anymore. Like there's a finite amount of people you can advertise to, or there's a finite amount of people that search for your keywords. But if you track actually your own users for champions, for job changes, it actually scales with
Mhm.
you because as you get more and more users and customers, you now get more and more job changes. So it's really the one channel. And for us, for all of our customers, it's somewhere in the range of 10 to 15% of revenue. So this is a channel that continuously, regardless of how big you are, generates 10 to 15% of your revenue. And haven't seen any other channel where that's the case.
Yes, that's a great product. Especially, this is probably something that I know that it's important, especially with churn and seeing who's the right champion, as you mentioned. So I think especially at a time like this, especially where you're saying that we're starting to see things pick up in sales and revenue, this is probably like something to look at, more than ever.
Yeah, yeah. And even more so right now, where it's really
Mm.
cautious, where everyone is cautious about buying new products. Basically, the CFO is the final person making a decision, and oftentimes, if this is a new, unproven technology, then it's an uphill battle to get them to sign up for it.
Mhm.
Um, the best way how right now sales are actually being made is if someone has already used a product and can vouch for it.
Yeah.
So we've seen that as sales get harder, the percentage of that are coming from people changing their job is actually increasing.
Right, got it. Okay. Well, just to kind of like, wrap things up and just, take out some key takeaways, I think you've provided some really interesting macroeconomic insights about what we're seeing now, what we have seen, and what the future is, you know, mainly in the commercial side and also on the recruitment side and in general, what our future also looks like. I think from what we've both said, it's looking optimistic. So let's hope that continues to be optimistic and goes up. But also, I think, just really interesting to hear a bit more about, what you're doing in the space and how, companies can really go about efficient growth and also not even just on hiring but also with products as well. How can we prevent churn, and that is something that's
Yeah.
integral in terms of growth in all businesses. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of summarize or like add to this?
No, I think that the recruiting industry will actually guide us the most over the next few months to figure out how it's all going. So very curious how the next few months are for you.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely keep you posted, and I suppose I better go out there and try and like get some more clients and then give you the stats on that. But yeah,
I think now is a good time. Yep.
it is. No, it is. Like, especially this week, in the UK, for example, kids are going back to school now. In the US, kids, I believe, went back to school last week. In Europe, they've gone back there. I've two of my clients, they're actually back from vacation now. So I think from now we're going to see a bit more uptick. I think the
That is very
holidays have
true.
finished now, haven't they?
Yes, yes. The parents have time now.
Exactly. They have time and they've also got a lot of business and work to do. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Christian. Thank you so much for jumping on this podcast. And then yes, I'll be posting this via LinkedIn. So, if I believe if anyone has any questions, can they sort of reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Yes, absolutely. It's either LinkedIn or Christian at usergems.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
It was great to chat.